He is not your son, so stop correcting him." My husband spat those words in my face, while shoving my hand off his son's shoulder in front of my entire family. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just smiled, a thin glacial smile, said fine, and walked out. By the next morning, his son's leased Cadillac Escalade, his private school tuition, and his bottomless allowance had evaporated. Before we delve more into this story, please let me know what country you are watching from. I like to know how far my voice reaches, and please support our growing channel by subscribing to our channel. Thank you. Before I explain exactly how I dismantled my husband's comfortable little kingdom, let me introduce myself. My name is Simone, and I'm 33 years old. I work as a financial risk manager at one of the largest investment firms in Atlanta. My entire job is built on logic. Spotting bad positions, calculating exposure, and cutting losses before they metastasize. It's analytical work, and when necessary, it's ruthless. I never imagined I'd need to run that same playbook on my own marriage. Marcus is 37. When we met, he played the role of a self-made businessman flawlessly. Tailored suits, a sharp sedan, all the right words at all the right times. Once we married, the truth surfaced quickly. His boutique consulting firm barely covered its own overhead. I was the one paying the mortgage, funding the vacations, and, most consequentially, bankrolling the extravagant lifestyle of his 16-year-old son, Julian. Julian was the golden child, and Marcus spoiled him relentlessly, using my money to do it. Julian swiped the supplementary card I'd given him like he'd earned every dollar himself. I tolerated his attitude for nearly 2 years, trying to keep the household peaceful. But everything has a limit, and mine arrived on a Saturday evening. We were at an upscale southern French restaurant downtown, celebrating my parents' 38th wedding anniversary. I'd reserved the private dining room, soft gold lighting, a long table dressed in white linen, the whole occasion meant to honor 2 people who'd built a life together the right way. My sister Renee, 30, had flown in from Charlotte specifically for the dinner, wearing a vintage emerald dress she'd hunted down for months. Julian spent the whole night slouched in his chair, thumbs flying across his phone, sighing theatrically whenever anyone tried to include him. When the entrees arrived, Renee gently asked him to shift over so the server could set down her plate. He rolled his eyes, then kicked the table leg hard enough to send a full glass of Merlot tipping directly into her lap, ruining the dress. I waited for an apology. Instead, Julian laughed. "Y'all are so dramatic. Just buy a new one. Not my fault. You don't know how to sit at a nice table." The room went silent. My parents looked stricken. I stood, told him flatly to apologize to my sister right now. Before he could answer, Marcus shot up, nearly toppling his own chair, and shoved my hand down as I reached toward Julian. "He is not your son," he barked, loud enough to bounce off the walls. "Stop correcting him. Know your place, Simone." I looked at the man I'd married. I looked at the teenager burning through thousands of my dollars a month. I looked at my sister dabbing wine off a ruined dress. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. My training kicked in instead, the same instinct that flags a toxic asset before it drags down an entire portfolio. Marcus and Julian weren't family in that moment. They were liabilities. I said one word, "Fine." I picked up my purse, walked to the front desk, and instructed the host to split the check, covering only my parents, my sister, and myself. I tipped generously, signed the slip, and left Marcus to handle the rest of the bill with a furious teenager and no way to pay for it. The drive home was the most peaceful 25 minutes I'd had in 2 years. No music blasting from the passenger seat, no excuses about his firm turning a corner. Just quiet, and the sudden, crystalline realization that I'd been financing my own disrespect. When I pulled into our 5-bedroom house, paid for entirely by my salary, Julian's Escalade was parked crookedly across 2 spaces. I walked past it into my home office. Glass, steel, dual monitors, the place where I moved serious money every day. As a risk manager, my job is to identify dead weight before it sinks the whole fund. You don't coddle a liability. You don't send it to therapy. You cut it loose, cleanly, without sentiment. Tonight, Marcus and his son were bad debt, and it was time to balance the ledger. I locked the door, sat down at my terminal, and logged into my wealth management portal at midnight. First, the supplementary cards. Julian's statement told the story on its own. $650 at a sneaker boutique, $275 on lunch with friends, $95 on in-game currency, all within 2 days. I deactivated the card permanently. Then I did the same to Marcus's platinum card, the one he'd used for a golf membership and a bespoke suit, insisting he needed to look successful for clients who didn't exist. Next came Julian's academy. Marcus had insisted the tuition, $28,000 a semester, was an investment in networking, never mind Julian's mediocre grades. The next payment was due in 3 days. I deleted the routing information, then emailed the school's finance office directly. As the sole sponsor, I was withdrawing all funding immediately and expected a refund of any prepaid deposit. Then insurance. I removed Julian as an authorized driver on my auto policy, effective at midnight. Letting an uninsured 17-year-old drive a vehicle tied to my name was a risk I refused to keep carrying, which left the Escalade itself. When Julian turned 16, Marcus had begged me to buy him something safe, swearing he'd cover the payments. He never did. Because I never take unnecessary risk, the vehicle had never been titled to either of them. It was registered to my personal holding company from day one. I called an overnight vehicle recovery service my firm used for corporate assets, gave them the VIN, the address, and proof of ownership, and arranged a quiet pickup before sunrise. The purge took under an hour, but it erased 2 years of being treated like an ATM. I poured a glass of wine, silently toasted my sister and the ruined emerald dress, and went to bed knowing exactly what would be waiting for them at dawn. At 6 the next morning I woke naturally, walked down to the kitchen, and started the espresso machine. The house was quiet, a stillness I knew was about to be shattered. I leaned against the marble island with my coffee and waited. The rumble of a diesel engine broke the calm of our quiet street first. Amber lights flickered through the curtains. Then came the sound that kicked everything off. "Hey, what are you doing? Put that down." Julian's voice cracked with panic. I walked to the front door with my cup still in hand. Marcus was already thundering down the stairs in his robe, sprinting barefoot onto the frost-covered driveway. I stepped out onto the porch and watched a flatbed truck winch up the Escalade while Julian paced in his pajamas, screaming that someone was stealing his car. Marcus marched up to the driver, puffing his chest out despite the robe and slippers. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Drop that vehicle or I'm calling the police." The driver didn't flinch. Lawful repossession, authorized by the legal owner. Confirmed 30 minutes ago. He glanced toward me on the porch. Marcus spun around. "Simone, what is this? Tell him to put it down." I walked down the steps slowly. "I haven't lost my mind, Marcus. I've gained clarity. You made it very clear last night, he's not my son. So I have no obligation to hand a teenager a $90,000 SUV. I'm just following your instructions. I'm done correcting him. I'm just cutting my losses." Marcus's face went crimson. He grabbed his wallet, pulled out his platinum card, and shoved it at the driver, who swiped it on a handheld reader. Declined. He tried again. Declined. Julian shoved his own card forward. Denied. "Accounts closed," the driver said, climbing into the cab. By now, neighbors had gathered on their lawns with their morning coffee, watching the spectacle in silence. The truck pulled away with the Escalade, and Julian collapsed onto the driveway, sobbing about how he was supposed to get to school. Marcus stormed back inside, jabbing a finger at me. "You think this is a game? You think you can humiliate us in front of the whole street? I'm draining our joint savings right now. Let's see how smug you are with nothing." I sipped my coffee and offered a genuine smile. "Go ahead, try it." He pulled up his banking app, and I watched the color drain from his face in real time. "There is no joint account, Marcus. There never was. Everything I brought into this marriage has been in a protected trust since day one. Did you really think I'd leave my capital exposed to a man whose business hasn't turned a profit in 3 years? You never had access to my wealth, only my generosity. And last night, you killed that." I left him standing frozen in the kitchen and drove to my office downtown. By 7:30, Julian, stripped of his SUV, was forced onto the city bus for the first time in his life. My phone filled with his furious voicemails about the smell, the cold, the indignity of sitting next to regular people. I deleted them one by one. At 8:45, the academy's headmaster called to confirm my funding withdrawal. Julian was pulled from his first period class and escorted to the administration office, informed his enrollment was suspended, and he was barred from campus, classes, and the lacrosse team. His entire social standing, funded entirely by me, gone in a 5-minute meeting. He did not take it well. An hour later, a colleague sent me a link. Julian, melting down in the school's marble hallway, screaming, kicking over a trash can, while dozens of classmates filmed him on their phones. The boy who'd spent years acting untouchable was now the punchline of his entire school. Security marched him out the front doors and left him on the sidewalk. Meanwhile, my credit monitoring software started pinging. Marcus, desperate to cover the tuition gap, tried applying for a personal loan online, $28,000, fast. But without my credit history propping up his applications, the algorithm saw him for what he was. A man with a dead business, an upside-down debt ratio, and a wrecked credit score. Denied, denied, denied. He couldn't secure a loan for $28, let alone $28,000. He called me. I let it ring 4 times. His voice was pure desperate rage, demanding I fix the tuition and stop humiliating his son. I told him calmly that I don't finance bad investments and I don't bail out strangers. I hung up. That evening, the house finally felt like mine again. No blaring TV, no discarded gear in the hallway, no teenager demanding to know what I'd bought for dinner. I poured sparkling water, put on some jazz, and started cooking, savoring the quiet. It didn't last. Just past 7, heavy pounding hit the front door along with frantic doorbell ringing. I checked the camera feed before opening anything. Marcus stood there, disheveled, but he hadn't come alone. Flanking him was his 34-year-old sister, Diane, and her husband, Andre. A 36-year-old regional HR director who carried himself like he owned the room before he'd even stepped into it. I opened the door. They pushed past me into my own living room. Andre positioned himself center stage, adjusted his watch, and cleared his throat like he was about to run a disciplinary hearing. Simone, we need to have a serious conversation about the toxic power dynamics you're enforcing in this household. I said nothing. I let him talk. Andre paced across my rug, weaving corporate HR language into a performance of moral outrage. What you did this morning wasn't an overreaction. It was systemically cruel. You stripped a minor of his transportation, humiliated him publicly, and cut off his education. In my line of work, we have a term for that. It's called financial abuse. I nearly laughed. Calling Julian a vulnerable minor was the most absurd thing I'd heard all year. He was a wildly entitled teenager who'd treated me like a walking ATM for 2 years. But Andre was riding his own momentum. Diane chimed in from the side, voice dripping with fake concern. How could you leave a child stranded like that? Marcus has been beside himself. You're destroying this family over a spilled glass of wine. It was never about the wine, and they all knew it. Andre raised a hand to silence his wife, stepping closer to me, his tone shifting from lecture to threat. You need to understand the optics here, Simone. You hold a visible position at a major investment firm, one that prides itself on corporate responsibility. I've spent a decade building an executive network across this city. I know people on your board. Marcus peeked out from behind them, a smug, victorious look forming, convinced Andre had me cornered. If you don't fix this by tomorrow morning, Andre said, voice dropping low, I'll leverage every connection I have to launch a full smear campaign. I'll make sure your board knows their star risk manager is an elitist abuser who traumatizes her own family and her defenseless stepson. I'll frame it so cleanly your firm will have no choice but to terminate you. They stood there, a united front of entitlement, waiting for me to crumble. I didn't apologize. I didn't raise my voice. I walked to the coffee table, picked up a thick manila folder I'd already prepared, and untied the string. Bank statements slid out, covered in yellow highlighter. Before you launch a smear campaign against my reputation, I said, looking directly at Andre, you might want to look at your own financial footprint. His smirk faltered. When I started my audit last night, I didn't stop at Julian's tuition or Marcus's platinum card. I went through every account tied to my credit line, and I found a shadow allowance that's been bleeding my resources for 2 years. Marcus had a corporate card linked to his consulting firm, a firm that generated 0 revenue, meaning the account was backed entirely by my credit. I read the charges aloud: an $8,000 couple's retreat to Turks and Caicos, $3,500 at a designer handbag boutique, 5-star dinners, spa days, golf memberships. None of it charged by Marcus. All of it signed for by Diane and Andre. Diane went pale, stepping back. Andre's chest deflated, the HR director persona evaporating into raw panic. I stepped closer, invading his space the way he'd invaded mine. I've already frozen that account and flagged every one of those charges as fraudulent. My bank takes corporate fraud seriously. A formal investigation means a legal obligation to report unauthorized transfers to the authorities. How do you think your executive network handles a fraud investigation with your name attached? Andre stammered that it was a misunderstanding, that Marcus had gifted the money. I reminded him Marcus had no authority to gift money that wasn't his. That was enough. Andre grabbed Diane by the arm and pulled her toward the door without another word to Marcus, practically sprinting out before the situation could escalate further. The door slammed. Marcus stood alone in the middle of the room, his human shields gone the instant their own comfort was threatened. He didn't stay long either. He grabbed his coat and drove off to find the two people who'd just abandoned him, to regroup. The first prong of their retaliation came the next morning at family court, where Marcus filed an emergency petition for spousal support, framed, with Andre's coaching, as severe financial abuse. He claimed I'd frozen his assets and trapped him in a hostile home, demanding his cards be reinstated, his allowance restored, and his legal fees covered. The second prong came from Julian. Stripped of his car and his school, he retreated to his room, set up a ring light, and recorded a tearful video accusing me of stealing his car in the night, ripping him from his school before graduation, and financially abusing his father. He begged his followers to share it so the world could see the monster I was. The video, tagged with our neighborhood and his old school, exploded. Within 48 hours, it had tens of thousands of views. Strangers flooded my professional profiles, demanding my firm fire me, calling me an elitist, a disgrace. Marcus watched it all unfold from my couch, smug, convinced he'd finally cornered me. He had badly underestimated who he was dealing with. I am not a person who cracks under a hostile takeover. I ignored the noise, walked into my office, and opened my laptop. If Marcus wanted to invite financial scrutiny by crying abuse, I was happy to oblige, and dig straight into the parts of his history he thought were buried. The office felt different the moment I stepped off the elevator, conversations dying as I passed, eyes dropping to screens. Julian's video had breached the walls of my professional life. My desk phone rang almost immediately. The managing director wanted me in his office. I walked in with my head high. 2 senior partners were already seated, tapping pens against their portfolios. The managing director pulled up the flood of 1-star reviews, hitting the firm's page, and asked, point blank, whether the abuse allegations were about to become a liability for the company. I didn't crumble. I sat up straight and told them plainly, I was in the middle of a high-conflict divorce from a man attempting to extort me, and the video was a retaliatory smear campaign orchestrated by his family. My legal counsel was already preparing injunctions. My assets were fully insulated. I wasn't asking for sympathy. I was giving them the same ruthless competence they paid me for. It worked. He nodded, satisfied, and told me to keep him updated. Back in my office, I locked the door, lowered the blinds, and opened my risk management terminal. The kind of proprietary software built to trace shell companies and hidden debt across the darkest corners of the lending world. If Marcus wanted to drag my name through the mud, I was going to use every tool I had to find out exactly what he'd been hiding. I ran his name, his social security number, and his dead firm's tax ID through the secondary lending markets. 10 minutes later, the results populated. Over the past year, Marcus had quietly taken out $32,000 from one predatory lender, then $55,000 from another. The total came to $170,000 in high-interest short-term debt, the kind of debt that compounds fast enough to bury a person alive. But his credit was too wrecked to have qualified for any of it alone. There had to be a guarantor. I pulled up the original loan PDFs and scrolled to the signature pages. My blood went cold. There, on the dotted line, was a meticulously forged copy of my own signature. Marcus had used my name and my credit history to secure every single one of those predatory advances. This wasn't a messy divorce anymore. This was felony identity theft and federal wire fraud. And I was legally exposed to debt I never authorized. I didn't panic. I printed every document and drove straight to meet an independent forensic accountant I'd worked with before. A sharp, discreet man named Brian. I handed him the folder and told him my husband had taken out $170,000 using my forged signature, and I needed to know where the money went. At his office, Brian traced the funds. They didn't go toward luxury cars or tuition. Instead, they were chopped into smaller wire transfers, bounced through digital wallets, and eventually funneled into one corporate account, a shell company registered as an LLC in Delaware, a state notorious for corporate secrecy. Brian dug past the standard registry into the tax filings tied to the company's EIN. The sole beneficiary wasn't Marcus, it was Andre. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't a spoiled husband and stepson draining my accounts. It was a coordinated scheme, and Andre, the man who'd stood in my living room lecturing me about ethics, was the actual architect. He'd manipulated Marcus into forging my signature, then siphoned the stolen money straight into his own pocket, using Julian's outrageous spending as cover. Brian printed the entire trail. I now had a dossier that could send both men to federal prison. I thanked him, paid his fee, and walked out ready for the court-mandated mediation. The mediation room felt hostile despite its sterile calm. I arrived early, seated myself, and placed my briefcase in front of me. At 10 sharp, Marcus walked in with a high-priced attorney in a pinstriped suit, funded, I now knew, entirely by Andre's stolen money. The lawyer didn't wait for the mediator to finish her opening remarks. He slid a settlement document across the table. Full tuition reinstatement, the SUV returned by morning, and $12,000 a month in lifestyle maintenance for Marcus. If I refused, he promised a scorched earth trial, board notifications, and a fight for half my house. I let him finish. Then I opened my briefcase and slid across a document of my own, our prenuptial agreement, waiving Marcus's rights to any spousal support or claim on my property. He'd signed it years ago and apparently forgotten it existed. The lawyer scoffed, claiming prenups could be contested under abuse allegations. So I pulled out the second stack. The forged loan documents, the wire logs, the Delaware shell company registration under Andre's name, and laid it across the table. Before you contest anything in civil court, I said, you should call a criminal defense attorney. Because right now your fee is being paid with laundered money tied to federal wire fraud. The lawyer's face went white. Without another word to his client, he packed his portfolio and withdrew as counsel on the spot, walking out and leaving Marcus alone with the evidence of his own downfall. Marcus left the mediation center in a blur of panic. Predatory lenders don't send polite reminders, they send deadlines. He had 72 hours to produce a payment on the $170,000 debt, and his only source of stolen capital, Andre, had already vanished to protect himself. Desperate, Marcus called Julian and told him to meet at the house. They knew my sports car was gone, the driveway empty, and assumed they had a clean window. They let themselves in, marched upstairs, and pried open the reinforced door of my walk-in safe room with a crowbar, stuffing a duffel bag with my collection of rare watches and heirloom jewelry. Julian suggested smashing the patio door on the way out to fake a break-in. Marcus thought it was brilliant. What they didn't know? I'd installed micro cameras in the safe room days earlier, and I'd hidden tracking tags inside the velvet cushions padding each watch. I watched the entire robbery live from my office downtown, sipping coffee, then called the local police precinct with the GPS coordinates, the itemized list of stolen property, and the vehicle description. They drove straight to a pawn shop on the edge of the jewelry district, dumped the watches on the counter, and accepted a lowball cash offer. Just as the broker counted out the bills, I walked in with 2 uniformed officers. I tapped my phone, triggering the hidden trackers to chirp loudly from inside the velvet cushions still sitting on the counter. Marcus tried to laugh it off as a domestic misunderstanding. The officers weren't interested. Faced with handcuffs, Julian turned on his father instantly, screaming that Marcus had forced him into it. It didn't matter. They were both cuffed, and marched out past a crowd of stunned onlookers. At the precinct, Andre showed up, trying to talk his way into their release, throwing around HR jargon and threats about racially motivated harassment. I stepped forward with an iPad and played the 4K footage of the break-in for the desk sergeant. Andre's bravado collapsed on the spot, and the sergeant threatened to arrest him too if he didn't leave. He fled without a word. I declined to press felony charges, but only after making Marcus sign a no-contest divorce, waiving all spousal claims, and a sworn affidavit accepting full responsibility for the forged loans. He signed everything, shaking, desperate to avoid prison. He and Andre weren't done, though. That night, using a burner phone, they sent an anonymous whistleblower report to my firm's board, accusing me of insider trading and embezzlement, sophisticated enough to trigger an immediate suspension. I was escorted out of the building the next morning, stripped of my badge, while Marcus gloated over the phone, certain he'd finally destroyed me. He was wrong. My firm's cybersecurity team traced the anonymous email back to a cell tower 2 miles from my house and matched hidden metadata to Marcus's device. Within 24 hours, I was fully exonerated and reinstated with a formal apology from the entire board. That same morning, federal agents raided Andre's office, arresting him in front of his entire staff on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. Hours later, agents seized every account tied to the shell company, including Marcus's. He was left with nothing. When security escorted him and Julian out of my house for good, Julian turned on his father one final time, screaming that he'd ruined both their lives. Diane arrived moments later, hysterical, begging me for a loan to bail Andre out. I gave her the same line Marcus had once used on me: "He's not my family. Stop asking me to fix him." Then I shut the door. 6 months later, Marcus was serving a 3-year sentence for identity theft and wire fraud. Andre was facing 5 years for laundering and tax evasion. Diane had vanished from the city entirely. I'd been promoted to vice president of risk management, and I took my parents and Renee out to celebrate at the city's most exclusive steakhouse. Midway through dessert, a server approached to refill our water, and I looked up to see Julian, in a cheap polyester uniform, staring back at me in horror. He recognized Renee instantly. His hands shook so badly the pitcher slipped, shattering on the floor in front of the entire dining room. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply turned back to Renee and asked whether she wanted the chocolate soufflé or the crème brûlée. He was no longer a threat or even a memory worth acknowledging, just an anonymous waiter who'd dropped a glass. When the bill came, I paid it, left a generous tip, and wrote one line on the back of the receipt: "Learn to pay your own bills." I walked out into the cool night air, slid into my car, and drove home, 33 years old, at the top of my career, and finally, completely free. The real lesson in this story isn't about watches, or tuition, or a repossessed Escalade. It's about what happens when you stop financing your own disrespect. Toxic people count on one thing: that loyalty means silence, and that peace means tolerating whatever they do to you. They mistake your patience for permission. But real peace was never found in keeping quiet. It was found the moment Simone stopped negotiating with people who never intended to treat her fairly in the first place. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg to be respected. She simply stopped paying for a seat at a table where she was never truly welcome, and let the people who depended on her find out exactly what they were worth without her. You are not obligated to bankroll your own mistreatment. Not for a marriage certificate, not for family, not for anyone who makes you shrink to keep them comfortable. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're just the truth, finally enforced. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to close the door on someone who refused to change, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. We've got a lot more coming. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.